So Garnet is, in my opinion, I kind of changed the title a little bit because I was thinking about it. My wife and I were talking about what we felt about Garnet, and we started really thinking, gosh, you know, it's really truly one of the most diverse gems out there. Not only is it unappreciated in many areas, but it's extremely appreciated in some and not nearly as much in others. So it creates this diverse gemstone from the super high end, you know, in the Russian demantoids, down to the very lowest common, you know, maybe some kind of a hessonite or something. But really, when you think about it, the difference between those two gems is not all that incredibly great. You know, the hardnesses are the same, the optical properties, while they're different. You've got roiling in a hessonite, and you've got horsetails in a demantoid. The difference is in what we've put on them as far as the value and the history and the romance and so forth. So I believe intrinsically that you can do this with any gemstone variety if you just put your mind to it and you actually take the time and invest in teaching people about the uniqueness of a particular gem from a particular locality. One of the ones we're going to talk about is iridescent andradite garnet, which we call rainbow garnet, which is truly one of the most incredible, unique gems that exists in the world, not only from what it is, but optically how it works. So, you know, I think there's a lot out there that you can take advantage of in the world of garnet if you're a designer or retailer, and that's really a fun gem. So here we go. So the origin of the word, as many of you know, but we'll kind of go over this again as a general review. It comes from, whoops, there we go. I didn't know we had all that animation. It's derived from the Latin granatus, or likely, you know, from the seeds of a pomegranate fruit, which resembles, as you can see down on the bottom right, the garnet crystals that we see. Granatus in Latin, or in today's word for garnet is granat. So it's exactly the same in German. And then the variety names, the original way that they came up with them was with, you know, combining a combination of whatever the garnet type is with the end lite, which is really from lithos, which is Greek for rock. Very quick garnet history, kind of gleaned a little bit from GI's information and other sources, but just to kind of, you know, go through that, I think it's kind of fun to remind ourselves that thousands of years ago, these red garnets were used in necklaces that adorned Egypt's pharaohs. They were entombed as prized possessions for the afterlife. In ancient Rome, you had signet rings that were carved out of garnets and used as a stamp to secure important documents. The term carbuncle was used in ancient times to refer to red garnets, but other red gems as well. That's why many people thought all red gems were garnets at first. And they were, you know, used for precious stones, and one of the most significant things in religion is that it was one of the precious gems given to King Solomon by God. Centuries later, a Roman guard and also philosopher and then amazing author by the name of Pliny. He published a series of books in which he included gems, and red garnets were amongst the most widely traded gems at that time. In the Middle Ages, from about 475 to 1450, red garnet was favored by clergy and nobility, and you see a lot of red garnet being used in ecclesiastical pieces. Then red garnet's availability increased with the discovery of famous Bohemian garnets. And in that region of what's now today Austria, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, kind of that region there, where Bohemian forests and so forth. And this source became the nucleus of regional jewelry, and it reached its peak in about the late 1800s. So you saw just everything back in those days in that part of Europe was being made with these rich red garnets. So just quickly, the geology, garnets typically form under metamorphic or what we call metasomatic conditions in which pre-existing igneous or sedimentary rocks are altered by heat and pressure due to tectonic forces that contact with an igneous intrusion. So it's just basically the metamorphic gem material. You can get much more technical. The metasomatic part of it would include some of the ones that we find in pegmatites. Believe it or not, we have incredible sources here in America for spessartite garnet. So we have spessartites from Ramona, Little Three Mine in California, and we have spessartites in Amelia, Virginia. Now both sources don't produce much anymore, mainly because it's not so easy to mine in America, but other sources produce such larger quantities, such finer material that they just don't bother to look for them anymore. Chemistry, most of you know all of these things, but just kind of reiterate, you're dealing with silicate, so you've got the end part over there, the SiO4 plus whatever, and you combine that with other elements. You've got iron and aluminum, or calcium and iron, or calcium and aluminum, or magnesium and aluminum, or manganese. So these are the different minerals that are required to combine together with the silicate in order to create we've divided them into these different categories based on the chemistry and the mineralogy. The very last one there, rhodolite, is a combination of pyrope and spessartine. And as we know, there are many different combinations within the garnet group. So you can combine all these different things. You can have pyrope, almandine, spessartine, and that's called pyrrole spite. So I mean, it can be, as you are well aware, very confusing, but if you really study it, it all makes perfect sense. The chemistry allows you to separate them. The refractive indices allow you to separate them when you combine that with the specific gravities and spectral information. When you combine all those different chemical and physical characteristics of the material, you can divide them quite easily. It's not a perfect science, as anybody will tell you, but at least it's a great way for gemologists to be able to pretty accurately differentiate between them. Some garnets exhibit a much more unusual growth structure. There was supposed to be something on, I must have skipped one of my slides anyway. This is a great crystal. This piece is about this big. We call it the horse's head. It's in our collection, and it has an unusual growth called hopper growth. But it's a wonderful deep red spessartite from Brazil. Now, of course, this is me at a garnet mine, so not all material that you see is gem quality. So I would say 99% of all the rough that you ever get to look at a mine is really not going to be very high gem quality material. So you're really rarely going to see top gem stuff unless you just get lucky. The optical properties of garnet, which I think is really fascinating, is that you have a relatively high refractive index range from grossularite, which is at 1.74, to rhodolite, which is at 1.76, very close to ruby and sapphire, to spessartite, which is 1.8, right at the edge of over the limit for the refractometer, to, of course, andradite, which is demantoid, which is well over the limit of a refractometer at 1.88 with really high refractive index. So it's a gem that starts at relatively high and goes to really high. And I put this picture in to show you, you've got spinel at 1.71, even though those spinels are pretty amazing the way they're cut, but the garnet in the middle really does have an incredible high refractive index at 1.8 there, the spessartite. The other thing that's interesting, of course, you know this as well, most of you, I have to gear this to a huge, broad stroke of viewers and audience, because you've got everything in here from people that are retailers to GI students to miners to scientists. So we got to cover the whole gamut. The dispersion of andradite is really awesome because it's at 0.57, which is so much higher than even diamond at 0.044. These are just different examples of different materials. We're all aware of the different ones, but this is a super 40-karat rhodolite from Tanzania. We have that actually in our booth. That's a 4-karat demantoid we also have, and a 24-karat spessartite, and then of course tsavorite, and then a malaya on the left, and rhodolite on the right. So and that doesn't even cover a fraction of the variety. And while I have you here, on that point, anybody who would want to see the incredible difference in different colors and possibilities in garnet, even for me, when I opened this book up, this is Vlad Yaborski's book on garnet. He did one on spinel before this. It's truly amazing to see how many different saturations and color varieties and even where they all come from. So it's a great book for that to look through. Has some good information in the beginning, but it's really it's a photo montage of the incredible variety of garnet out there. The other thing that I find that's really fun with garnet is that you can differentiate many of these by their inclusions. Now, I purposely put up what you're going to say to yourself, wow, those are kind of, not in great focus kind of inclusions, but this is what you see if you're looking through a loop at a garnet out in the field and you're trying to differentiate between the different garnets you might be looking at. So if you want to look at really super pictures that show you the exact details, I would highly recommend Hyperion, the new release of the site that Lotus Gemology put out, in which they have absolutely spectacular inclusion images, and they share them with anybody. So you can go down and you can just look up garnet and you can see all the beautiful garnet images. But this is the reality of what you're seeing when you're looking through a loop. And so you've got spessartite there, and you can, once you learn all of that, you can easily differentiate between these different garnet types just by looking at them through your loop. You don't need to do an RI, and you don't need to do a specific gravity. You don't have to do a spectrum on it unless you need to double check something that's a little bit more tricky. If you study these inclusions, spessartite's very unique, tsavorite very unique. The two on the right, they're different in their scene, but they're both very unique and typical. Umbolite or malaya, also very typical. Rhodolite has usually not a whole lot in it, but usually has just tiny little specks. In Tanzania, they call it shilingi, and it's just, then you have indicators that then tell you that you're going in one direction or the other. I highly recommend doing that if you're out there and you're out buying somewhere in the field, or if you're wanting to buy from the public or what have you. Those are great ways to quickly identify what you're looking at. This thing doesn't move very fast. I'm just going to do it by hand. Now, one of the garnets that really hit big were these mandarin garnets from Namibia. They came out in the early 90s. There was a farmer that discovered them in 1992. And they're vivid orange. They're much oranger than even what you see today from Nigeria. Some of the best Nigerian stones still don't compete with the orange of this material. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of production from there. I was just there recently, and they are trying really hard to go back into the area. It's an extremely remote area in northern Namibia. Namibia itself is incredibly remote. It's like a giant desert. So to get from one place to another, you have to really plan your trip. But in that northern area, it's on the border with Angola, and there's a river called the Kunene River, and there's a confluence between the Kunene River and another one called Marienfluss, and that's where these deposits are. So it's remote, but very possible, and there's a big desire amongst Namibians to continue to go back up there and try and mine some more. The color comes from manganese, which is interesting. The deposit is a heavy manganese deposit with, and you'll see here, this is kind of what it looks like. So you can see how remote it is. The river is not always wet, just like here in Arizona. It's just during certain times of the year that you're going to have a lot of water. But you can see this crystal here in the middle. They form in a mica schist matrix, and they're these isosa tetrahedrons, which have 24 faces, so they look almost round, and some of them are partly exolved as well, so they really do look like balls when you get them out. So the rough material, when you do find it though, is great for faceting, because your yield is typically quite high. You can get about a 40% yield from a sphere, but the center of these spheres often have these inclusions in them, very similar to what you see in demantoid garnet, where you always have these horsetails are right in the center of the sphere. So that's where spessartites kind of got their name recognition. They went out there and became really popular. They quickly became very expensive. Today, a really high end like that 10 carat would sell for $4,000 or $5,000 a carat, whereas material like this from Tanzania or Nigeria is selling in the 500 to maybe at most 2,000 a carat, something like that, unless you got a huge gem. So yeah, they're much more expensive. These are all examples of the Fanta material. What I have photographed here in particular is from Tanzania. So Tanzania, Zambia, and Nigeria are the primary producers of these orange spessartites today. And they're not treated. This is how they come out of the ground. This is how they look. Beautiful Fanta orange. Now, one of my all-time favorites, and my wife's as well, and I'm sure for many of you, is the Malaya or Umbalite garnet. I know you're all familiar with the name, but I'm going to go over it again for you. The reason it's called Malaya is a Swahili word for outcast, and many of those stones, when they were first being introduced into the marketplace, people didn't want the odd color. They didn't want the undersaturated, weird color with a little bit of brown in it or whatever, and so they would throw it out, and it would become called just the outcast whatever material. But as time has gone by, we've realized that when you facet this material, it's a much more open color, it's bright, and often, believe it or not, this is like with tanzanite. Most people don't realize this, but almost all tanzanite has a color change or shift to it. Almost all umbalites or Malaya garnets have a color change or shift to them in different daylight. And that's part of the allure, I think, of the gem when you see it. You don't really know exactly what color you're seeing when you're looking at it. So umbalite, that name comes from the Umba Valley, which is where they were found in Tanzania. We get them now from other locations as well, but that's really the main original source, now in Mahenge as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we have also these pink garnets coming from Mahenge, light pink, pyrospessartite, or to the pyrrole spite garnets, which it's a combination of pyrope and spessartite, or which would be rhodolite, more rhodolite-like, or pyrrole spite, which would be more like a Malaya. So you've got a range of material coming from that area. Most of it is more in the Malaya end of the spectrum, and ends up being incredibly brilliant when you cut them. I mean, some of the ones that I've seen, they look like pink diamonds. They're so incredibly brilliant, and they're clean. And so there's another example of kind of jewelry that you can make out of this material that my wife did there. And then here you have some other, I've put in, just because I think it's really fun for you to hear about these things and then to have a place to go to see them, okay? We don't have a lot of that material, but Gemfix and Parlay, they do. Parlay is marketing them as lotus garnets, and they're really pretty. Some of them are just pink, pink. Grossular garnets, also one of my all-time favorites. I would say it's probably right now the most popular garnet out there. The mint greens, the light greens, they just evoke this feeling of spring and new birth, and they're so pretty. And these are crystal examples of what they look like coming out of the ground. The one on the left is a super fine gem crystal that you would think had been polished, but it's not. And these range anywhere from colorless to pink to any kind of grosser garnet, yellow. They have all different beautiful hues. So when you're out there, colorless garnet is one of the most rare things you're going to find. It's really, really rare. but it's really beautiful. And if you can find that, it's a fun gem to work with. Pink grossular is also one of the rarest, and they're gorgeous, and they tend to go really much more red in incandescent light, and they'll look more pink in daylight. Of course, you've got Tsavorite garnet, which is the ultimate of the grossular family variety, and its color is caused by chromium and vanadium. There's always a confusion. People are like, well, is it caused by chromium? Is it caused by vanadium? We don't know. Why is there this confusion? When you're doing the chemistry on these gems, the absorption peak of chromium vanadium, they're almost right on top of each other. So there's a lot of confusion because of that, or there isn't anymore. But certainly if you're looking through a spectroscope, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. And then again, other sources: Bridges, Tsavorite, AGTA, Tsavorite Factory at GJX. And if I leave anybody out, it's not on purpose. It's just I'm trying to give you some names of people that you can go see. Andradite garnets range in color from brown to vivid green, and are, of course, the highly sought-after Russian demantoids. I already mentioned the dispersion, but also what's interesting is that Arizona produces these beautiful andradite garnets, and some of them actually get to the point of being considered good enough to be called demantoid. I'll show you a picture later. The early demantoid garnets that were discovered, probably the very first ones that were ever documented, are from Italy, from Valmalenco, Italy. This is an example of a really good crystal with great color from that locality. So you can see it's nothing compared to what we see today from Russia, but comparable to what you could see from Arizona or Madagascar. And of course here we have the Russian material, which is super fine, super rare, discovered in 1853 in the Ural Mountains near Ekaterinburg. And there are several mines. There's not just one mine. The material is alluvial mostly, and it's just recovered in mostly open pit mining. Production is way down right now, and demand is very high. This pair right here of 5 carat each sold in auction for $70,000 a carat. So the price has jumped dramatically, and you know what happens when there's that kind of a sale in an auction. Everything else goes up to the same price. We have a pair of 10 carat each in our booth, which I have been told is probably the finest and largest pair ever to come out of that area. They were discovered in 2007, end of 2007, early 2008, but they have not been out in the marketplace at all. So this is the very first time you'll get to see those. But here's an example of a Tsavorite garnet, very similar in color, same shape. I chose the same shape, and a gem that's fraction of that price. So you've got very similar colors that you can use, and you can buy at a very different price point. Doesn't have the dispersion that you get with a demantoid. Doesn't have the cool horsetail inclusion, but it's still a gorgeous gem. And as I mentioned, I was in Namibia not long ago, and I had the pleasure of going to the Namibian demantoid mine and visit there. This is their rock sorting plant, and then inside their open pit mine, there's a drone that's flying right above the miners there. That's why they're all looking up in the sky. The drone was about to fly right over the top of us just to film while we were down in the mine. The production that day was not great, but they do have material that comes out that's beautiful. This is just to show you, this is a typical type of material that you would find on any given day at this mine. So you're not always getting nice material. And that's important for people to realize, is that you see these gems and you're like, wow, is it really that expensive? But then when you're there and you go to the mine and you realize week after week after week, in the middle of nowhere, with all the expense, this is all you're getting, and then once in a while you get the gem quality, and then you kind of start to understand why the prices are where they are. You do, get great material. So here's some fabulous gems that were put into jewelry by Adam Foster out of St. Louis, and so this material is being used by designers. It's much less expensive than the demantoids from Russia. The color is not as saturated, but you do get this dispersion, which you really are looking for in demantoids, where you get the flashes of reds and greens coming off of the gem. I'm focusing a lot of time on andradite because I believe andradite is a gem that is one of those that's underappreciated. Because you have this massive appreciation for demantoid, there should be an equal appreciation for andradites in the full range because they have the same high refractive index, the same high dispersion, and they look like diamonds. When you mount them in jewelry, they look like diamonds. So they should be more appreciated, in my opinion. Oh, so here back to, so in Ambanja demantoid mine, which actually the owner of that mine happens to be sitting in the audience back here. He may not want me to tell you that, but he's here. There's an open pit located in an area that's kind of like a marsh that regularly floods. So it's a challenging environment for mining. I took a picture of the material yesterday, but when I tried to bring it up on my screen, it just didn't quite come up. But there is production. Most of the material is very small in the, say, 2 millimeter to up to 6 millimeter range. But again, beautiful color, and it actually has a blue hint cast to it. So it's like green with blue that you see in the stone, like you see some of those mint garnets that have blue in them. They're absolutely gorgeous, and there will be production in the future. They're focusing a lot of time on that. So I think it's going to be exciting. The andradites from Arizona I mentioned earlier, these were discovered on an Indian reservation, the Apache reservation in San Carlos, by a guy named Charles Vargas, and his company is called Apache Gems. So there's not a whole lot of material that I've seen recently, but when it was first found, he had quite a bit that came out, and he did quite well with that. So you got multiple sources for these different andradite garnets. Another gem that I happen to be lucky enough to be involved with the research of is called Molly garnet or grandite garnet. The reason that the term is a double term, kind of Mali's where they came from in Western Africa. And so initially they were just called Molly garnets because nobody really knew what kind of garnet they were. And so everybody just said Molly garnet. So then we did a bunch of research on it, and we discovered that it was indeed a new variety of garnet, which is a combination of grossular and andradite. So you can see there in the middle, the refractive indices fall kind of in between, and you have a combination of the calcium and iron from both, from the grossular end and the andradite end, and then it's silicate. So we had a new variety of garnet that came out in the early 90s, which is really exciting. And that's a great article, lots of information with the mines, rough, pictures of lots of rough. These crystals were huge. So you have these massive crystals that some of them are this big, like a grapefruit. And you break them open, and it's what you dream of in rough. You break them open, and inside there are these little nodules of gem quality material. Now, most of the garnet itself is not gem quality, especially the outside, but the inside had these little nodules inside. So it was truly amazing. Production is way down, lots of problems in Mali, socio-political issues, so there's really no production at the moment. But it was a great gem and has a very high dispersion as well. And you've got iridescent andradite garnet, which I mentioned before, or what we call rainbow garnet, and that is coming from Alamos, Mexico, also New Mexico. There's some material that comes out of Arizona, but the iridescence is quite weak. And then there's material from Japan, which is super strong, but very small. And it's a play of color due to an outer layer of growth over a garnet, a dark garnet that has an outer layer of growth on it that's just millimeters thick. And the way that growth is, it creates almost like it's a diffraction grating. So it's dispersing light into these interference colors due to the way the structure of that growth is. It's a really, really fascinating rare gem. This photo was taken by Mia Dixon. Bill Larson and I actually owned that mine at one point together. We operated it for a number of years and brought out as much material as we could. And so we're still sitting on some rough, but there's not. It's very, very difficult to cut. You have to be an expert cutter to be able to cut the surfaces and follow the surface of the crystal without cutting too deep and then cutting away all that play of color. Here's a great example of one that has, almost looks like an opal. Purple rhodolite is a very popular gem. They were extremely rare. Anything of this color coming from Tanzania, especially in this size, was considered extremely rare. Most of the rhodolites were more purplish red, and so you rarely ever saw that until recently, when we discovered this material from this incredible purple from Mozambique. And that garnet was first entered the market, probably was discovered before 2015, but didn't really enter the market until 2015, and has been increasingly popular with designers. Some of the people that are carrying that are Marin Watt, who was one of the very first to bring it. They actually brought it out in 2015 in Las Vegas, and then Prima Gems and Dudley Blauett, they also carry it. So it's rare. To get anything over 5 carats, extremely rare. And most of the material is smaller, but beautiful color. It can be anywhere from this super bright, open purple to a very deep, deep, deep purple. Eric Brownwart also, sorry, he also carries it. And he has calibrated material. And finally, one of the more unusual and I think really crazy, fun opportunities out there in the garnet world are these red hessonites. They are, if you shine the light through them from behind, they look orange, like deep, really rich orange spessartite. But if you shine it from the top, they're red, just like a red spessartite. The inclusions are exactly like hessonite. They have, under the microscope, they have a roiled effect, just like hessonite. So you can visually identify them without question. But visually, they're red with reflected light. So as an alternative to a spessartite that's going to cost you $250 to $500 a carat, maybe more, you've got a stone that's going to run between $35 and about $150 a carat, and it's red. Now, the reason it's less is because of this roiled effect. So it's got inclusions, and it has some crystals that sometimes reach the surface. So you got to kind of pick through the material to make sure you're getting material that you can cut or that's already cut that has very few crystals on the surface. But I think it's one of the great gems and something that's great for using in jewelry. Again, another pair of earrings that my wife did. So it's just a brief overview of the incredible variety of garnets that are out there in the world and what's available, everything from $35 a carat to $70,000 a carat, and there's more to come. There's going to be more sources as we keep digging and finding new things, and I think it makes it for a really fun material, and I hope you enjoyed seeing this. And I'd like to thank my wife, who's here today with my 2 kids, who helped me get this all put together in the rush and craziness of this whole show. So thank you guys for being here, and please, we got time for some questions actually. Got 10 minutes for questions if you'd like. We got the ball. Anybody want to ask a first question back here? Okay, now we got a question from a geologist and gemstone miner, so I'm sure this will be difficult.
Hi, thank you. Was the recent Malaya find central Mahenge region in Tanzania, was that kind of shift? Do you know, is it light source, a single element reacting, like in Alexandrite, the chromium and a different light source? Do you know what's causing color shift?
I've been told that it's always the pyrope and the spessartite end members that then allow for that color shift, and then you have everything in between that's from the Malaya, typical Malaya. So I'm not really, I don't know exactly. We have lots of articles that have been written about color change in garnet, and there hasn't been a lot done on the actual color change or shift in the Malaya or umbellite material. But it's the end members that are causing it somehow, the elements within the end members that are causing that. And of course, the light, you know. Anybody else? Yes, right here. Oh, we got somebody up front that I'll repeat your question since the ball doesn't seem to be working.
So the Savorite, does it have many sources?
The question was, does Savorite have many sources? So Savorite's primary sources are in Kenya and Tanzania. Those are the two main sources for Savorite. Yeah. So and they're pretty major. I mean, they produce a lot of material, and so the availability is there. It's not enormous, and there's always a lack of product for the demand that's out there, but it is available. Yeah. Yes, here in the back.
Regarding the $70,000 advance
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
when and where was that sold?
That was in the recent Hong Kong auction in, it's either, I can't remember, it was Christie's or Sotheby's, and it was last, let's see, 2018, spring of 2018, I think is when it was, yeah. And they were 5 carat each, so a total of 10 carat. Yes.
Has Bruce Bridges opened up their Savorite mine again after it was closed?
I don't think so. I would talk to Bruce to get the exact story on that, but I don't think he's opened it back up. There were a lot of political issues there, and they're trying to, get a handle on that. And before he goes back in and deals with, he wants to make sure it's not only safe but secure, and that everything for export is done correctly. So yeah, everything that he has is pre-existing material, hard to come by, and he's been cutting some old material. He pulled out some rough that they had been holding back, and he cut some very beautiful big stones. So if you have an opportunity to go by there, I would, because they're not going to be around for long, I'm sure, with the 50th anniversary as well of the mine.
I get to try this.
Yay, all right, it's working.
I was at the Navigador mine in Brazil, and they have a kind of garnet that looks like a cityscape, kind of like sometimes you see pyrite and in steps. What is that?
That is this one here. Let me show you again. I don't know, you may not, I think you came in after I had this slide up. Not sure if you did or not. But,
Well, I saw the one that was multicolored.
this one here, did you see
Yes,
that one?
the horse
Okay.
head. Yeah.
So that one's actually one color.
That is
and
one
it is,
color.
it's that material. The way the light is hitting it from behind, it's such a deep, rich color that it's kind of looking like it's multicolored, but it's one deep red, kind of orangey red color. And it's that hopper type formation, which is classic for Brazil, and that's, I believe, what you're talking about.
That's right.
And
That's what I'm talking
some look, much more dramatic than this. I mean, crazy, just like a cityscape.
Why does it grow that way? I don't know.
I don't know that myself. There has been some study done on that. Hopper growth is something that is well studied because it occurs in several different minerals. I can't tell you right here exactly how, but I know there's quite a bit of material written on that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And dispersive demonstrate.
Yes.
Large color.
Uh-huh.
Where does it come from? Which region?
The pair, are you talking about the
No,
pair or
large.
the one single one?
Yes, $20,000 per carat.
Yes, okay. That's the only one in that box that is not heated. So this is an interesting, I'm glad you asked this question because it's something I meant to touch on. They started heating this material a number of years ago. We don't know exactly when, but probably in demantoid. I'm sorry. She asked about, I'm very sorry. I thought maybe the ball was working now, but it's not. Okay, I'll repeat the question. Her question was that I have a stone, a large stone, it's 5 carats, in our booth that's amongst a whole set of other demantoid garnets. The other demantoid garnets are super bright green, like the one you saw in the picture up here, the pair. This one is more of the traditional, typical material that has all the dispersion. We have all these colors coming off it. It's still green and very nice. It has all these colors coming off of it. It's the only one in that box that is not heated. We think about 10 to 15 years ago, they started heating this material. Of course, they didn't tell us about it, but suddenly they came out much richer green, like really super rich green. But what happened was there's a trade-off. The material that's heated doesn't have nearly the dispersion that the material that is not treated does. So something happens as you remove the iron content within the material from the heat treatment, as you change the valence state. There's something that happens also in its ability to disperse light. No one's really done any kind of study on that yet, but there's something going on like that. So it's a trade-off. You want the color or you want the dispersion. You usually don't get both. But I like that stone. Honestly, it's my favorite stone. Yeah. So if anybody wants to come by, I'll make sure that you get to see that stone because it's spectacular. Yes?
Does the heat affect the durability of the demantoid because they are more fragile than the other garnets?
Yeah, demantoid in general is a more fragile garnet overall. We don't know if the heat has any effect on its durability because it's already fragile, more fragile than regular garnets. You just have to be super careful. So everyone's always really careful when it comes to setting. Melly, you tend to have 20% extra of what you're planning on just to account for breakage with melly. Larger stones, not so much. Yeah. But heat, in my opinion, has an effect on all gems' hardness. That's just my opinion. If it's high enough, I think it does have some effect. We're starting to see that in corundum, and it's being discussed now with some of the new, not so new, but treatments that are recently being now called out by the laboratories, and where they're using a bit of difference in pressure and temperature to do the heat treatment. They say that they're noticing a durability issue with those sapphires.
You talking like this? Can you hear me?
Which one?
So I was under the impression that garnets weren't heated. And now this is the first time I'm hearing someone talk about heated garnets. Is this...
I know. It's frustrating. It's a frustrating thing that the problem is there are so few people that actually are carrying Russian demantoid garnets that if they do, they may not even know. And honestly, for a decade, a lot of people didn't know. We've known for quite a while, and we've always disclosed it. But if you have one company or two companies that are out there disclosing it, that doesn't get to the general public. And there hasn't been a whole lot of research done. In fact, there's some labs that they know it's happening, but they feel that they can't prove that it's happening. I can show you under the microscope the difference. It's under extremely high power, and you see a difference in the horsetails. There's some small fractures that occur along the horsetails, and they're tiny. I mean, they're almost indiscernible. So it's a tough one, but we know it's happening, and it has been happening for quite a while.
But what about the other garnets?
Honestly, I am not aware of any other garnets right now that have been subjected to heat treatment that has been successful in any way. My wife was just about to remind me of something, but my daughter may have. Do you have a question, Addison? No. Oh, you're going to hand it to the next person. This is my daughter helping out here. So my wife reminded me of something that happened to us, and this is something important for all the jewelers to know. Garnet is highly, highly sensitive and susceptible to what's called thermal shock. This is extremely important. And I wish these types of things were written about more than the chemical structure and all these other kinds of things about garnets. If you take a garnet and you set it in a piece of jewelry and you're welding, you're heating up that ring, and you then take and quench that, 99% for sure that garnet will fracture. And it will fracture it will explode into hundreds of pieces. And this happens every single day. And yet, there's not enough information out there telling people about this, that you have to be super careful with garnet. But if you are careful with it, and you don't heat it and quench it right away, It's a super durable gem, and it can withstand anything. But that is one of the things that it cannot withstand. Addie, you want to hand her the, somebody's got the ball there.
I noticed on your slideshow that you said garnet's available in all colors. Is it available in blue? I've never seen it.
I was hoping somebody would ask me that question. Okay, so in my entire career of being in the gem business for over 30 years, I was always told that there was no blue garnet. About, I think it was probably a good 20 years ago, I was shown this and another one. And the other one I was allowed to sell about 10 years ago to a collector. And this one remained in the collection of my very first employer. And they dealt in gems from Africa. And this is a blue garnet. So if anybody wants to come see, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time here showing everybody this garnet. But if you want to come by the booth, I'll be happy to show it to you under different lighting conditions. You can see it. What they are, really, truly, are color change garnets that don't change from the blue to the purple. That's all it is. And so it's an unusual, super unusual gem, but I have one. So right now, it's not for sale, but I'm happy to show it to you. Yeah. Yes? Back here. She's going to bring you the ball. You want to roll it?
I don't want to make that.
Thanks. Another question, Ed. Talking about the blue garnet, year and a half ago, Lindi region,
Yeah.
Tanzania,
Yeah.
bluish green, blue garnet, high vanadium content.
Yeah.
Does that count?
It's got a lot of green. I mean, yes, you're right. It has a lot of green in it, though, in my opinion.
Yes.
I haven't seen any that are as blue as this small one that I have, but if you have, I'd love to see it.
yours.
I'd love to see it, yeah. But yes, that's getting as close as you can get, I'm sure.
Thank you.
And we have another question here in the front. The question is, what is the heat level required for demantoid? I personally do not know. It's not something that has been shared with me. Right now it's considered proprietary. I don't think it has to be very high, honestly. If it were, I think the garnet probably wouldn't do very well under higher temperatures. So I'm imagining it's in the hundreds of degrees Celsius, yeah, but not much higher than that. Right here? We got time for one more question after this that we have time for. Yes,
I've heard
right?
of tanzanite fracturing, having a thermal fracture just from an oven to a freezer or something. Is that possible?
Yep, absolutely.
Really?
Yep. Thermal shock is a major thing with gems. I mean, it's something you have to be really careful about. Diamond has no issue with it. You can take diamond and put it in you know, super cool it when when we do.
About like a ring, person's finger, reaching into an oven and then reaching into a freezer. That's possible.
Well, that I haven't quite heard. I mean, your hand would burn at that kind of change of temperature. I've never heard of that, but I've heard of what you were saying from a heating oven. If you were then to put it into something really cool, then yes, it would react that way. But diamonds, we put in liquid nitrogen. We'll float over liquid nitrogen when we're testing them for their colors, cause of color, and that's the best way to be able to actually get a spectrum that you can read. And diamond is unbelievably durable under all sorts of temperature shock conditions. It doesn't. It conducts it so quickly that it doesn't hurt the stone. Any other questions? Great, well, thank you.
I want to say something.
Oh, yeah.
Good job, Daddy.
Oh, thanks, sweetie.